Comedy is such a uniquely powerful and effective tool for talking about climate because I think it's just a powerful tool for talking about and reflecting and communicating really big ideas. It has always been used as that.
You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host. I've got a great guest on the program, Esteban Jorge Gast. It's going to be a great show. He is an award-winning comedian and writer, comedian in residence at Generation 180, co-creator of Identity at Play. Welcome to the program, Esteban.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here. I feel I would look at your other guests are like powerhouses, and then there's me. So I'm thankful I snuck in somehow. Admit something happened. I'm here. I'm happy.
Well, we're grateful to have you, and looking forward to a fun show. I like to think of myself as funny, but it's very sporadic. I always have a great respect for people who do it for a living. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about kind of your journey to being a comedian and then into the climate space.
Yeah, of course. Well, I started in education. I was an educator in a high school, got a master's, taught at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign.
No way! I'm from Chicago.
Really?
Yeah, 3 of my brothers went to Urbana. Yeah.
No way. I ended up going to high school in Naperville, if you know Naperville North.
Yeah, one of my brothers, and my 3 or 4 nieces and nephews, went to Naperville North.
What an incredible and small world. So yeah, so I was down in the great state of Illinois. Um, it was so wonderful, and I was teaching and down at U of I, and I was doing a little bit of stand up comedy and like stuff in entertainment on the side. So that was always a thing I wanted to do. I like made some short films. I started doing stand up. I got to work with really fun people just because Champaign is a smaller market, right? So like these big comedians would come and they'd ask the local comedy club, they're like, "Hey, do we have someone local to open up, any strong local comedians?" And I was just lucky, sort of this big fish in a smaller pond kind of things. I got to work with Colin Jost and some of these really wonderful comedians. And then life gets really interesting because then I eat, pray, loved. I joke. I went through a breakup. I was like, who am I? What am I doing with my life? And I, like all of us would do, ended up running this off the grid eco community in Panama. The classic story. You're 25 years old, you go to Panama, and it's this totally off the grid community. And I was there for 2 years. And so that was still, I would say, like in the education lens, it was this like sustainability team, right? Like eco community. There was a study abroad program integrated. So we had people coming in, we grew all our own food, and I got to run the education portion of that. And based on some of the friends that I had made in entertainment, that got turned into this TV show called Jungle Town. So that was on Vice. Vice at the time was launching Vice Land, which is the TV network, because Vice dared to ask TV networks are dying. What if we start one? And then they did it, and then it was a show, and that brought me to LA. And a bit ever since then, I've sort of been at this intersection of education and entertainment. I still like in many ways consider myself an educator, educator, organizer, person who like brings people together in these like learning, community building experiences. And at the same time, I've continued doing stand up and I've been lucky enough to tour and travel and, writing and lucky enough to work on different TV shows or movies or things like that. So the entertainment stuff is still going. So I'm a little bit of like now I'm like an artist who also empowers and builds systems for other artists to talk about meaningful things. So I sort of wear those two hats, which just means I'm tired all the time, which means I just love naps, which means I could always at any moment fall asleep.
Well, I guess I fall into that category. I'm a nap lover, and yeah. See, I thought I was just getting older, but now you make me feel better about myself that it can start a lot younger. This napping thing.
Yeah, you can that's truly as it's a gift that I can fall asleep at any moment. I'm like on planes before the plane even taxis away. I'm just there and I'm asleep and I'm just like, I have too many jobs.
That is a gift, falling asleep on a plane. I don't have that gift as well as some people do, but I long for that gift. So, How do you use comedy and humor to break down climate issues, which are often kind of an overwhelming or heavy type topic for a lot of people?
Yeah. I think comedy is such a uniquely powerful and effective tool for talking about climate, because I think it's just a powerful tool for talking about and reflecting and communicating really big ideas. It has always been used as that. If you and I Google best stand-up specials of all time, we'll see George Carlin talking about very heavy things, like American imperialism. We'll see Chris Rock talking about race, we'll see whatever Louis C.K. talking about divorce, and like we'll see all these comedians. Dick Gregory is this amazing comedian during.
Oh, yeah, I know Dick Gregory. Yeah, I saw him at when I was in Tulane in New Orleans.
Wait, that's great. But he was making, yeah, jokes about segregation as America was still segregated. Like, that's one of the things that brought him, into, let's say, the mainstreamer, and I think you look at you go, "How can you be possibly making jokes about this?" You're actively if for those who don't know, Dick Gregory is a black man, right? So it's like you're actively being discriminated against systematically, and you're doing jokes about it. And I think what you find is, like, that's just has always been the role of comedy. Like, that makes sense. It illuminates hypocrisy, right? And I think you found what Dick Gregory did so effectively is, I think, galvanized, you know, people who are marginalized, and also pointed out how absurd it was for white people or for people who are benefiting from this system, right? Like, how, like, just, like, deeply absurd, the system of segregation was. And I think if like, when I think about climate, or when I think some of the work that I'm doing, I feel very comforted because I just have to look back at any comedian that I admire and go, "Oh, that's how they talked about this." How is or that's how they're talking about it now. How is Jon Stewart talking about, a political situation now that is very scary, and feels very heavy? Oh, that's how he's talking about it. So I think just comedy has always served that role. And then I think there's like a technical answer, which depending how much you want to nerd out on, but it's like, there's different types of comedy. So something we did in the Climate Comedy Cohort is one of the years we really focused on the Inflation Reduction Act. So we like literally made comedy, and we said the goal of this comedy is to be very silly, very interesting, very fun, and tell people about the Inflation Reduction Act, because it's, one of the most meaningful climate legislation, bills passed in whatever modern history. And one could argue, it's up there. It's on the, it's on the Mount Rushmore of climate bills. Um, and I think people just don't know about it. So we were like, we're going to use, comedy, and we're just going to make jokes about this. So it's like very focused on one thing. Inflation Reduction Act. It's a funny name. It's very interesting. What does it do? Who voted for it? Wow, no one voted. Like, no one from, like, here's the opposition. Here's what people say. Here's the funny. How is it being implemented? Like, there's so many funny little things there that you can grab onto. So that's sort of one approach of like, hey, we want people to learn about this. This is just awareness. And then there's another approach of like, people are going and they feel lost or they feel hopeless. Let's just have comedy about what the human experience is to, be existing in a system that is flawed, and having to choose between, being thirsty and buying a plastic water bottle, but then that stays in the earth for 3,000 years, or just staying thirsty. That's not a good option, or whatever it is, right? Like, and some of those contradictions and complexity of just being a human in this messy experience. So it's almost like writing, right? It's like, do you want it to be poetry, or do you want it to be prose, or do you want it to be a a summary of a analytical, let's say, academic paper? Like, comedy sort of fits in all of those.
Well, it's a fascinating answer. My head is bing, 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 all over the place. And, one of the thoughts I had was the court gesture, right? That goes back to, Shakespeare or way beyond that, and in terms of kind of making fun of things, and sometimes making fun of the political characters there, maybe making fun of the king a little bit, but potentially getting killed if he did, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally, there's some people are like, "How do you do comedy about this?" And I'm like, "Comedy," it's like, totally, it's like from the beginning that we were able to communicate, someone was approaching some topic that probably was heavy with a little bit of, like, whimsy or mischief, So that yeah, this is just an extension of, shout out cavemen telling silly stories around a fire.
Yeah, it's always a great way to break through to somebody because I would think that, when we have this polarization, there's one thing that people will listen to is somebody who's actually funny and maybe kind of getting them laugh at themselves a little bit. If you're really gifted, you get people to kind of like, oh yeah, the guy's got a point. And also the absurdity, as you pointed out, is like, when we point out the absolute absurdity of some of these positions, it's like, oh, okay. But when you're locked into serious, like there's very little that is going to penetrate that wall.
Yeah, I also think comedians, especially if you're a touring stand-up comedian, you're traveling everywhere, right? So I tour a good amount, but some of the comedians we work with in the Climate Comedy Cohort tour a lot more, and you're going to places that don't necessarily agree with your political take, and you've learned how to navigate that, right? So you've learned to find the common ground. It's like if you have a family member who is very different from you politically, you like know not to come in hot and be like, "Well, you're wrong." Right. So it's like if I'm doing comedy, which I have done, let's say in Houston, I was just in Houston a little bit ago, and I'm there all the time, right? Like I'm there, um, being thoughtful about being like, great, let's build trust before I get to anything climate right before I get to that. Let's build trade, or let me like, Texas has more solar power, built more solar power than California. So also the fact that they go, this California Latino kid coming here to Texas. And I'm like, listen, you're all the tree huggers. This is great. You built so much solar. You're doing Green New Deal, baby. Like, so I think there's an interesting thought there too of like, yeah, a live performer and like a talented storyteller builds trust, knows how to do that, right? Like so it starts very one of the things that I think about is how am I learning alongside the audience, right? So if I want to share something that I've learned, I can't go up there and be like, "Did you know this? This is a thing. This is a fact." Because that pushes people away. I go, "Man, I realized I've been thinking about this thing and I actually looked into it and it's kind of isn't that wild? Isn't that just a wild fact?" That's just so interesting. I don't even know. I'm fine. I'm figuring it out. Right. So you do this thing where you're like on the same level as the audience, which is very genuine, right? Like that is the best way to communicate. It's not like this, wink, wink. I'm still better than you. And I think, yeah, I think there are all those lessons on how to do storytelling and narrative work and these like cultural strategies that's a little bit different that I think comedians have picked up on, and have done for a while, that I think a lot of, you know, just a lot of messaging misses. Like, I think, like, I don't think we're one fact away from people being moved to action in the climate world. Like, I don't think that people who are standing still just need one more fact about parts per million. Like, that's very helpful. That's a very once you're in it, once you've been invited in and you're, like, in the process of learning and shifting some of the way that you operate in life. But I don't think the general public, like if we put up billboards that just said, 1.5 degrees Celsius is bad. Like I think people would be like, okay, I don't even what is Celsius? I'm in what like genuinely what is Celsius to Fahrenheit? I don't know what that is. And they would keep driving. And I think we have to be like, oh yeah, let's walk alongside you, audience, as we figure this out together.
That is a very good point, and, I probably have a lot of people on the show who are professorial types who tend to be this kind of professorial style, which is telling people and they're nice people, and they're trying really hard to communicate, and yet, like, to a mass audience, it's probably like,
My dad's a professor. Actually, both my parents were professors for a period of time, but I'm like, professors are professorial vibe, amazing. You just work with an artist, and comedy is would be, I mean, I'm a comedian, and I think comedy is uniquely positioned that way. But I'm like, any artist would also be work with, like, that's why arts exists, like, so part of me is like, yeah, going to this, and I'm like, you're an incredible like you have incredible information, and then work with someone who thinks a lot about how to communicate information. So we've done that like we worked with Probable Futures, this incredible like climate mapping company, and I love them, and it was almost like Mystery Science Theater. They're brilliant. They, like, work with governments to do, like, projections, and they're just in I, like, love them and love the work that they're doing, but it is very technical, and it's very so they would talk and share very helpful information about the research that they're doing that is extraordinarily valuable, and then me and my friend Pratima, who's a writer for the Colbert Show, would, like, reflect on it and process, and it can kinda be like surrogate audience members that are like, "So you're saying that," like, just to understand, "You're saying this," and I feel like that was incredibly effective in that way. It's like all that took was finding a comedian, comedians who are willing and understood some of the material, but, like, could work with those people and be like, "Great, okay, let me help. Let me just get this straight. You're doing this, and that means this." Yeah, so I think professorial types, I'm like, "Heck yeah, get in it, be nerdy, wear your incredible blazer, you know, have like, go into your office with leather-bound books, and then just talk to and engage and collaborate with a comedian or an artist."
Yeah, I'm thinking of one of my, favorite guests, and she's amazing and has like 40 patents and a professor at Stanford, and she would just be the perfect foil for a comedian, and it would be just funny because naturally she's just so kind of, nerdy and super smart, and like, you would just have a field day, and it would be great. It would be like super educational because she would very earnestly explain all these things, and you would be, like, riffing off of, all these earnest,
That's exactly right. I think if we look at again, like, this is one, just a fun, good idea, but two, there is real power and weight to this. If we look at the last presidential election, right, a lot of those ideas were largely normalized on podcasts hosted by comedians. Joe Rogan tours is an active stand-up comedian, owns a comedy club. Like Theo Vaughn or some of these is a comedian. Andrew Schultz is a comedian. This like manosphere, all this thinking of like we need a Joe Rogan on the left. We need some of the choices that the candidates made not to go on like those are podcasts where comedians talk to, I think, often bad experts who don't know their things, who are pretending to be experts, and they're having conversations back and forth with like a historian who's just totally is uninterested in learning and presenting a narrow slice of history.
Can we riff off of the manosphere for a second? I mean, come on, there's gotta be some good jokes material about the manosphere. I mean, an insecurity-laden, sphere, that promotes, like, this manhood, which is a bit false.
Anyone who talks about how they're manly that amount is just so deep. It's like a little kid being like, "Am I a man? Hey, am I a boy or am I a man?" That's my impression of those guys. But I think I'm like those people sat down. Those people sat are comedians who sit down with sometimes experts, but largely I would say in big quotes experts, and have conversations with them. And I'm like, yeah, that's what's missing is are, are experts who are rooted in science and research and have things like 40 patents going on in a bunch of places, and like being like, hey, here's the science of how this thing works, and have someone just ask a bunch of questions, and the questions can be very silly, can be very dumb, can be very elementary of like, why, like, how is the earth warming? Like, and I think more spaces for that would actually move a lot. So I think it's particularly interesting that people are like, we need a Joe Rogan to the left, and I'm like, that's a comedian. So you need a comedian who's willing to talk to people and ask a bunch of questions and be whatever, at times irreverent, and like that. Okay, great, then we have a bunch of those.
Yeah, and make it entertaining, make it fun because essentially, listening to the scientist who's got 40 patents for somebody who's like average, Joe is like, you got to be kidding me. It's not happening.
Yeah, and you need to be like, "How many patents is enough?" 40? That's incredible. I have 0. We gotta talk about the distribution of patent. I'm sick and tired of 1% of people having 40% of the patents. That's my Bernie going hard on patents.
So you created initiatives like the Climate Comedy Cohort and Climate Cultura. Tell us more about the programs and how they connect with diverse communities and climate.
So Climate Comedy Cohort is with Generation 180. Generation 180 is this incredible nonprofit. I love them. They're doing a bunch of different things. Some that I'm not involved with, but think is so cool. Like they're putting solar on schools and then like building education programs and savings and like stuff that I'm like, this is a no-brainer. I'm so grateful. And then they have a bunch of like cultural strategies. So with Generation 180, um, we did this program called Climate Cultura, which is for Latin American creatives. I think just seeing who's really impacted by a changing world and by a warming planet, and it is like largely, these communities that are often not in the climate conversation. I'm Colombian. I lived a few years in Puerto Rico. Like I was sharing, I lived in Panama, and in Panama, I mean, there's islands that it's some of the first climate refugees. There's islands that are at ocean level, and people are being forced in, and these are poor folks, these are indigenous folks, so it's like, so no one really tells their stories. But you can zoom that into I'm in LA, I'm on the west side, there's a window here, I see a tree, and it's pretty cool even when it's very hot in LA, and it's like, and I go and I see friends in historically Latin American, or black and brown neighborhoods, and it's so much hotter. So I think there's also that in the climate movement of like who's being impacted, and are those people, do they have an opportunity to even tell their stories, to create art around it, to like tell people who they are, or are we just, just sort of avoiding some of those? So climate cultura does that, and we work with Latin American creatives, not just comedians, and it's like Climate 101. We create this space for people to ask questions, literally what we're talking about. Build community, ask questions, peer-to-peer learning. So it's not just me coming in. I'm not gonna go to Miami and say, "Hey, everyone, it's me. Let me tell you about things." I'm gonna be like, "Hey, here's how I'm processing the world. Here's an expert who's gonna talk about things. What is interesting to us? What stories do we wanna tell our community?" Um, so that's Climate Cultura. And then Climate Comedy Cohort is with Gen 180 again, and it's with this group at American University called the Center for Media and Social Impact. They have this Good Laugh program, which you would love because it's all about comedy as social impact. It's called the Good Laugh. So there, it's professional comedians coming in, learning about climate, and then creating things from that. So we've done live tours where we've gone to like red states. So like we've done comedy shows in like red places, like places that normally don't talk about climate. We worked with Comedy Central. There's in a few weeks, like a digital series that's coming out. So we've done all sorts of, it's like all hands on deck. You're doing stand up, you're doing sketch, you're making videos online like an influencer, you're touring as a comedian, you're, writing a movie. So we're doing all the things. So it's really, really exciting. I really do think it's I think it's a all hands on deck time.
Now, is that a nonprofit or who's?
That's a program through Generation 180, which is, Generation 180 is involved in one, and the Climate Comedy Cohort is a partnership between American University's Center for Media and Social Impact, their Good Laugh, and Generation 180.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's amazing work. Yeah, there's another. What is it? Adam McKay's organization, Yellow Dot Studios. Do you ever collaborate with them?
Of course, I work with them a ton. We just did a show called "So You Think You Can Science" here in Los Angeles, and it was like, again, like comedians thinking of how do we communicate information? How do we communicate information that is fun and interesting and silly and engaging, and people really want to be a part of? So we had comedians and we had climate science, like a presentation. They had to like guess some of what the climate science is, what that graph represented, what that photo of like a bladeless windmill is, right? So instead of telling people, hey, there's bladeless windmills, they're great for urban areas because they don't have the big blades. Everyone should be doing that. This is what we talk about when we talk clean energy. This is the future. Why aren't we moving in this direction? So Yellow Dot's they're wonderful collaborators. I've got a bunch of projects with them. They're just so, so lovely and thinking differently, taking risks.
Let me ask you, the big question here, which is, hey, we've got this Trump presidency 100 days old, and he's kind of melting down most environmental regulations and, cutting into the EPA and trying to limit California's ability to have a program to phase out the internal combustion engine in cars, and the list goes on and on and on. What does comedy's role in this situation? Where do you see this leading?
It's the big question. It's the big question, and I think a few I think a few things. I think number 1 is there needs to be a different, approach to Trump as well, right? Like, and to the American people, the way that we talk about Trump. We spent a whole election cycle saying he's a threat to democracy, and he won. So I don't think saying Trump is bad. Trump is so bad, you guys, is does much in terms of communicating. I think I think for a certain group of people, I think like see what riles Trump hates to be mocked. Trump hates to be poked fun at. Like, and that's the thing. It's like he seems he has power because everyone approaches it so serious. Like dictators, Bassem Youssef is a great guy. He was in Egypt and he was making a comedy show about like a dictator there. Like people comedy has existed under that. And like to have them be like the emperor has no clothes. Look, this is not he just is like dumb. Look at how look at how much he's struggling. Look at this guy trying to do tariffs on Chat GPT. That like this is the guy this right. And so I think there's a different approach to that of being like how do we there's a way to delegitimize what he's doing, and I don't think it's by saying hey, bad bad bad. I think it's by like poking fun and mock, and I don't think that's for everyone, but I think that's certainly an important part of it. So I think that's one thing. And I speak that this is very, very important. I speak that for me, Esteban, as an individual, and no one that I work with. But I just think, yeah, like um, dictators just don't. Dictators lose their power when you see that they're human and they're just like little dorks running around, trying to earn daddy's love. Like I think when they feel unflappable and godlike and just like nothing gets to them. So I think that I also think like an army like we have every it is so important now than ever for artists to I think artists have a responsibility to talk about what's going on and to talk about if art reflects the world around us is changing in ways that is faster than expected towards authoritarianism, and I think artists should show up for that. I also think art has been devalued, so artists don't have money. So I think it's the role of organizations and high net worth individuals and everyone else to step in where the government, especially the government is using fear tactics to pay artists to do that. Because I think like, yeah, if you're struggling and if you're nervous that you're not going to continue getting work as an artist because you say something or do something, then that's a way to shut things down. So I think there needs to be boldness from the philanthropy world and the funder world to invest in artists and invest in artists everywhere. And it's like it's movement building instead of going, like the last campaign we were in to a few celebrities and saying, hey, can you vote for this person? It's like let's go to a bunch of artists in smaller places who have influence in smaller places and build a legitimate movement of artists and comedians and storytellers who are telling different stories from the grassroots, from the bottom up, and not just hoping. I love Yellow Dot and Adam McKay, and not just hoping that like there's another Don't Look Up. Like we can't be like, oh, I hope we're one again. Do we think we're one movie away from stopping this? Like, do we don't live in an epiphany moment. We live in like the real human world that every day requires action from all of us to stop authoritarianism, right? Like there's no Jack Ryan is not coming in. It is you and I telling stories and building community. And that's what to do. So I think, yeah, I just think great, let's do that with artists. Let's do that with storytellers.
Tell us a little bit about what you're up to next and where we can see you make fun of whatever you're making fun of.
Yeah, well, I personally, me, Esteban, You can follow me on socials, at real Esteban Gast. And I have a bunch of shows. Like I have a show tonight at the Elysian Theater. If you're in Los Angeles, it's a very cool, very interesting theater on the East Side. Doing they're like pushing the bar on what it means to do comedy. So you can come see me do my thing. My thing is if like this, but on a stage and more jokes. And then what I'm really excited about, and what is also sort of when we think about the moment that we're in, is we're doing another climate comedy cohort. And if that's something that's interesting to anyone listening, heck yeah, come be a part of it. Both as a comedian, you have to apply as a comedian, but both as someone who wants to communicate ideas or fun or whatever that looks like. We're doing a bunch more climate cultura. So if you want to work with Latin American creatives, and then I'm just like out here doing some consulting and secret projects that I won't talk about just yet, but like thinking about these ideas of what's it look like to connect storytellers and comedians and creatives to some of the climate folks, to some of the progressive folks, to some folks, yeah, and both in terms of helping like organize, like communicate ideas, and a bit of what we're talking about of like how do you just empower um, comedians and artists to recognize the influence that they have. They have influence, whether they believe it or not. How do they? How do we leave and inspire artists to take the responsibility of their art seriously, especially in a frankly kind of dire time like this? I think there's a beautiful quote from George Orwell that's like, and I'm gonna butcher it, but and this is the beautiful closing thought that distills everything. A lot of what my philosophy and of change. But he says like in simpler times I would have just written a book, but because of this political time, I've had to turn into this type of person, right? So George Orwell, a bunch of gorgeous political books, and sometimes I think about that where I'm like, yeah, this is the time we're in. In different times, I'd say, "Hey, Matt, let's go out there and just do whatever." And it's like, no, no, I'm grateful your show exists. It must exist. It has to exist. There has to be counter to some of the things that are happening in the world. And never has your show been more important. And people listening should start their own shows as well. Like everyone should do this because it has influence and it has impact. And in simpler times, maybe I would just be here as a silly Billy telling you about my new TV show. But instead, I'm saying, hey, I'm here. I'm committed to working and empowering artists. I'm committed to working with demographic, my people from Latin America that are left out of the conversations. And of course, I hope to make a movie, and I'm sure I will. But now that movie's gonna have weight and substance because we're just here. We're just here, and we have to show up.
Well, amen to that, and I really appreciate you being on the show. And one of the things that you were saying was triggering a thought of the Rick Rubin book of The Creative Act, and he's the great record producer, and I kind of felt like everybody's a creative. Everybody has the potential to be creative, whether you're the electrician or the whoever. Like we all have the possibility of being creative in our lives, and like to take ownership of that. And as you said, everybody can, whether they start a podcast or they're just creative with their friends and family or coworkers, everybody's got an opportunity to be creative.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's so important for people to realize. I love that. I love that thought.
Well, thank you, Esteban. Everybody check out Esteban at his social channels, Esteban Jorge Gast, and go see him at the Elysian Theater or the Crow. I was at the Crow. I need to check out the Elysian Theater. I don't think I've ever been there. It sounds like a fun time.
Yeah, were you at the Crow for Bergamot Comedy Festival?
I was there. It was some women comics that were at the space, and it was really funny. They had some really good ones. I was laughing really hard.
I'm there like almost twice a month. I'm there a lot when I'm in town. That's really, really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great little space, and everybody go out. It was great comedians too.
Oh, so good. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Well, thanks so much for having me. This was so great.
Thanks for being on the show, and we look forward to connecting with you going forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
To learn more about our work at A Climate Change and how you can help us reach our goal of planting 30,000 trees in the Amazon this year, visit aclimatechange.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. See you next time.